Professor Frances Kay-Lambkin is the chair of the National Health and Medical Research Council, director of the Hunter Research Medical Institute, psychologist, and mental health researcher. Professor Kay-Lambkin also leads an international team of researchers, clinicians, and industry partners in an innovative development and translation of evidence-based treatments for comorbid mental and physical disorders. The organisation is also currently seeking participants for a new Cyberchondria and health anxiety study. Wow, welcome to Pure Health Hub, Frances. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity and talking about a bit of an area of passion for me, driven by a lived experience that I'm sure we'll get to.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't think you'd be alone. And, you know, we've talked about this for a long time since Google's been around, right? You know, the Dr. Google journey, and should we be looking at it and should we not? So now tell me, Cyberchondria, what is it? And is it an official diagnosis?
Well, that's a really good question because officially in our diagnostic manuals that psychologists and psychiatrists use, we don't have cyberchondria listed in there. What we do have is what's called health anxiety, which, as the name implies, is people who get preoccupied with worries about their health or the health of their loved ones, and particularly children. And we know that health anxiety affects around 6% of the Australian population, so it's pretty common. And I think we'll probably see, and we've all probably found and experienced this ourselves, that COVID has probably lifted our levels of health anxiety just generally. And so where the cyberchondria comes in is that it's related to the word hypochondria. So it means excessive. So overuse and over worrying about physical and health and well-being issues to the point where it affects your ability to function in your day-to-day role and your ability to do the things that you would otherwise have done if you weren't, I guess, bound by those worries. So the cyber bit is that instead of going around and going to lots and lots of health professionals trying to get those worries alleviated, we go cyber, we go online, and we use Dr. Google to try to seek that reassurance around whatever symptoms that we're experiencing or worried about. So what we're trying to do in our research project is just understand at what point all of those searching online for health-related issues and concerns is okay. And the point at which it starts to overlap into something that we as psychologists might be a bit more worried about, what that looks like, what that feels like for people, and how we can then help them with those worries.
Yeah, exactly. It is just taking that next step. Then, so what are the causes or triggers, perhaps, for cyberchondria?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I don't think we know the answer to that. So the roots of health anxiety can be around, concern, worries about your body. And I guess over time, particularly with the internet and virtual care and all those different things that are starting to transform our healthcare system, we've really moved as a society to become much more active agents in our own healthcare. So we need to take a bit of control. We're often the ones who are chasing up specialist appointments and trying to find answers. And really our health service is evolving to support us being empowered in that way. And so as good consumers, as good empowered consumers, we need to try to get as much information as we possibly can about what's happening to our bodies without always realizing that, medical training and psychological training and those sorts of education and clinical experiences can really help us understand what to pay attention to and what not. And so I think probably driving health anxiety is access to all this information online without necessarily the background and the access to the training we need to understand what's a credible source of information and what's not a credible source of information, or how indeed we might use that information to support our health and well-being.
Absolutely. I mean, information overload has been, is across all the verticals, right? Our health and everything else. So it's learning how to use that information, isn't it, really, to for good and instead of overwhelm. But I think that's a big part of our problem now, right? Or a big issue is our overwhelm with this information. And I think this leads into, Pure Health Hub, and we're here to promote people, particularly women, to own their own health journey. by undertaking research and understanding, I remember times where I think we just rely so heavily. We went from owning our own health journey to modern medicine, which has obviously been fabulous, but I think we've kind of handed over responsibility. So, then when we're not getting it from there, then we sort of get a little bit panicked. So we do encourage that personal research, but should we be using Dr. Google to self-diagnose or at least learn new ways to treat ailments?
I'm going to say
probably.
Yeah, but no, but
Tricky one.
yeah, but no, but yeah, but no.
Yeah.
So it's a really tricky question. I think it's probably a somewhat of an individual one. The thing I think we can do is, and we should be doing, and this is what's wonderful about the internet and Dr. Google, is that we have this avenue to source, to query and to publicly debate health information, to self-manage some of the aspects of medical conditions and concerns that are able to be self-managed, or where the evidence suggests that we can actually, manage them ourselves. And it's this great way of connecting us 24/7 to information. So, I'm guilty of it myself, particularly through COVID, but even beforehand, when my kids were, middle of the night and, screaming and having all these symptoms, I'd be on there Googling furiously what to do, and peer forums and those sorts of things online are so helpful. And when you don't have access to practitioners and to medical practitioners. And I think that's why, groups like you and Pure Health are so important, because what we don't know when we do that is what's that credible, trusted source of good information. And what are the ones that are acting more about just on a personal experience, or disconnected from evidence and science and technology, or disconnected or expressing more of a personal view on things. And we saw that a bit with debates around vaccinations for COVID, and whatever your stance is, it just became such a loaded and very intense place to have those discussions online. And so whilst I think the internet is great and really important to help us learn information and understand more about ourselves and what's out there, I don't think it should be the only source of information and debate and recommendations that we take forward, particularly with our healthcare.
Yeah, and I think it's also taken, when you refer to the vax situation, which I completely agree. I think the thing is that there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect between being able to think analytically or critically and find, assessing the source, that it's a credible source. And I think that's vitally important when it comes to, I know people who are anti-vax, and of course they were continually fed anti-vax information, because that's right. What Google does when it's really unfortunate that that's the case. So, yeah.
I think that's part of what so excites me. I don't know if that's the right word, about the research that we're trying to do now to understand all of that, because I only became aware through, working in this technology field. And so I'm not sure how wide that awareness spreads beyond people who are in the field, that the way in which Google and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all those platforms work is by feeding you back information that's directly related to what you've clicked on or accessed before. Exactly. So rather than getting a balanced, holistic view on an issue, necessarily because they want you to click more and more and get more and more, likes and those sorts of things, that those, even the search engines are geared to spit up to you search results and information that fits with the profile they're collecting about you on particular issues. So, I mean, I've had situations where I've been talking with girlfriends at a morning tea about, a jam Jubilee cake, and then it's recipes for Jubilee cakes come up on my Facebook feed. It's insane. And so the issue is, if we're only using those sorts of platforms for access to health information, then we're clicking on the ones that look the most gruesome or the most alarming or the most engaging, or that trigger some kind of emotional reaction, which is what the algorithms are designed to do, then we're probably getting worst case or a very extreme example of what our symptoms or our health issue might be. and we're not getting exposed to the range of other things that that could also account for those feelings. And I think what we want to do as a key outcome of this research is understand what the behaviours are like of people who are searching for information online, what draws their attention, where on the screen that's happening, what they're clicking on and why, so that we can then use some of that information to affect those algorithms that Google and Facebook throw up, so that people can get a bit more of a balanced view on things.
Yeah, wow, that's a massive undertaking, isn't it? But it needs to start somewhere,
It
right?
does,
So
yeah.
this is why I think, but before we get to that study, what are some of the strategies that we can use? Are there any strategies developed yet that we can use to help deal or cope with this, with cyberchondria? And when do you consider seeking professional help?
Yeah. So I think there are. There are a lot of great platforms and programs and apps that you can download on your phone or on the internet that help people manage anxiety. One of the anxiety is a really awful thing, and anxiety disorders can be a really awful thing to experience. But one of the positive things is that it's highly treatable. And so we've got wonderful programs out there from trusted providers through Beyond Blue, the Black Dog Institute, connected with universities and medical research institutes like my own, that people can access cognitive behaviour therapy to help work through anxiety generally. And so those same principles of what helps people, I guess, take a step back and consider whether what they're interpreting and feeling is based on facts or based on something else. All of those strategies in cognitive behaviour therapy. So again, cognitive behaviour therapy, which you may know, but I like to explain it because psychologists love to put labels on things.
Please, absolutely.
So cognitions are just, it's a fancy word for thoughts, and behaviours are the things that we do. And therapy is the way in which we get people to examine their thoughts and examine their behaviours and work out whether it's working for them or working against them, and then to try to make some changes. That's kind of what we do in cognitive behaviour therapy. And so if people are accessing, are feeling anxious and worried and are able to access an online cognitive behaviour therapy program, then we know that has the best evidence for support for anxiety. And so although it's not directly targeted at cyberchondria, the things that we think are driving that cyberchondria or that excessive reassurance seeking by searching online for health information is part of an anxiety condition. And so people can apply some of those techniques and strategies to cyberchondria. In terms of what we might do to help control or limit our time online, one of the things that I would suggest are things like maybe give yourself a time limit. So I'm going to search for this bit of information for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to stop and take a break. And then maybe I'm going to make some notes of what I've learned and where I've learned it from. And then I'll maybe get some trusted people in my life that I'll try to have an offline conversation with them about that. Now, that might be a GP if people are lucky enough to be able to get into a GP. It might be someone in our trusted network. And it might even be, you can do a post on Facebook or something like that and say, guys, I've got some worries about this, any advice, and try to seek advice from lots of different sources. The other thing we can do is always look for trust or credibility marks on the websites that we click on to find, particularly about health information. So does it come from a government? Does it come from a university? Does it come from some kind of legitimate medical institute, a bit like HMRI, the Hunter Medical Research Institute? Or is it from a newspaper or a magazine that talks about evidence? And so, as well as maybe clicking on a search that comes up and looking for those sorts of marks, so you'll usually find that information in the Contact Us or the About Us section of the website. So have a little look on there and see whether there are scientific advisors or medical advisors on these types of groups or boards. And also maybe then search specifically for the institutions or the organisations that are supporting that information, and do a bit of Google stalking, if you like, about who they are and where they're coming from and who they're funded by and what their purpose is. And that's the way that you can start to become a bit more informed about where this opinion that you're reading is coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. It's got a lot, it's such a wonderful tool when it's used
Yeah.
correctly,
Yeah.
isn't it? But it is being able to find. So they're really good tips in terms of establishing the source's credibility, aren't they? I think that's a wonderful help. Now, I also love this, that you're going to conduct a study. The Hunter Medical Research, or the Hunter Medical Research Institute, is going to conduct a study, or you and your team. So what's required on Cyberchondria? So what's required to undertake the survey, to be able to undertake the survey, and equally, who wouldn't be suitable to participate?
Yes, so that's a really good question, because often with research, people get an experience where we've got pretty strict eligibility criteria, and that's often because we're trying to really control and hone in on on a condition or a disorder or an experience, and try to I guess limit the impact that other things might have on a particular question we're asking. So I do apologise on behalf of all researchers for being quite strict. What we've tried to do with this study is not be strict, though. So we're looking for people all over Australia who are aged 18 years or over, so we're after adults. And we're also looking for people, so you don't have to have searched online for information before, but if you have, that's okay. And what we are, so we're wanting the general population, because we want to understand that whole spectrum of experience of searching online for health information, and at what point it tips over into what we might call cyberchondria. And so we need everyone. The only people that we're just a bit hesitant to recruit and include are those who already have chronic medical conditions.
Is that any, not just psychological, but any physical?
No, it's the psychological ones. Yeah. And so some of those psychological, so some of them, so ones that have what we call psychosis associated with them, where we think that being asked to go through and think about some of the questions we're asking might actually do more harm to people than good. And so to a certain extent, people can be the best judge themselves as to whether they would like to, whether they're in a position to be able to, if they have those conditions, whether they're in a position to be able to respond. But also we've got some connections online and links online where people can connect with us and talk about whether they're suitable, whether they think they can do it, or if it causes any distress or worries afterwards, they can talk to us about getting help. But so it's 18 years or over, and in the general population. And what happens first is people will click on a link, and you can access the link via our HMRI website, and I can provide you with that information.
I've got that link. We'll
awesome, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because it's one of those really awfully long, ridiculous websites that don't mean anything, but
we can shrink it down, I guess, to have
a tiny URL, yes, into. And so once you click on the link, you'll get an information sheet, which is provided, which we work with our ethics committee to make sure that it's all credible and trustworthy and confidential. You read that and you go, yep, I'm happy to click yes. And so when you click yes, you'll be taken straight to a survey. So the survey will take maybe 15 to 20 minutes to complete. And it's going to ask you about what sorts of things you do or you search for online. And it's got some questions about health anxiety in it. And what we're trying to do is link up what people are saying they're doing online with what they're feeling in terms of health anxiety, to try to understand what that spectrum of experience is in cyberchondria. And so every person who completes the survey goes into the draw to win an iPad as a bit of a recognition for the time.
Nice.
And then at the end, there's an opportunity to do a bit more. And really that's, if you can get to the Hunter region, or if you can't, then let us know and maybe we can come to you. We want to bring people who are willing into our clinic here in Newcastle and do a bit more of I guess, a lab experiment, if you like. And so I don't want to put people off, but what that means is that we'll bring you in and you'll work one-on-one with someone like me, so a psychologist from our team or a social worker from our team, and we'll give you a set of symptoms, and we'll ask you to do a search online for those symptoms. And we'll then measure. We've got a bit of a camera set up on the computer, so we'll measure then what words you put in, how you structure your search, where you look for, what you click on when the search comes up. And there's a little camera that tracks where your eyes are going, so we'll be able to look where you're paying most attention to on websites. I know, it's pretty cool, right?
Incredible.
I know, it's not
amazing.
so nothing. We don't stick anything in you.
No.
We don't do any of that sort of stuff when we say our lab, but it's just really screen capturing everything you're doing. And then we're going to ask you to come up with what you think your likely diagnosis or cause is of your symptoms. And for some people who have health anxiety, that might be a bit worse than others who might not. So that's one of our hypotheses. And so you'll have an interview with our psychologist or so with our team, research team afterwards. It just says, okay, how was that experience for you? What do you reckon's wrong? And how did you go about it? What did you pay attention to? And what did you think of it all? And then that will help us then work with Google and others to understand, as a function of health anxiety, where people are looking and what they're paying attention to and what they're more likely to attribute symptoms to when we give them a cluster of things to think about. And so, yeah, that's the other exciting part, I think. And we do offer some financial reimbursement to people who want to participate in that aspect of it. So that'll take maybe 1 to 2 hours to go through.
Okay. Oh, wow. I think it's such a fascinating topic, I think, as we said earlier, but and also I think even now, so given the global, the health issues, COVID and everything else of recent times, I guess we can all be forgiven for having a little health anxiety, right?
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate you joining us today to help distinguish a little bit about the difference between a normal level of health anxiety or the more concerning cyberchondria. Professor, thank you so much, Frances. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's so wonderful to have a chat with you, and thank you for the work that you're doing in trying to connect evidence and science and research to people in the community, and particularly women, because it's only through your method of, I call it science communication or medical communication and connection, that we've got any hope of making the difference that we want in research. So keep doing it. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a little labor of love, I must say. But
keep it up.
I'm learning so much that I also have to watch my own health anxiety.
Indeed. Well, I'm going to go away now and Google a sore leg. I'm going to go.
Well, I think fortunately, despite being an anxiety sufferer, it's not one area that it's not too, I'm not too concerned about that. But I do totally understand where people come from, particularly if they've had health issues in families and all sorts of long history that can be triggering for them. So, I think it's such an important topic. So
thank you. Well, thank you, and thank you to everybody who we hope will engage with us and really help us make a difference in this area too.
Absolutely. Thanks again. Lovely to chat to you, Frances.
Thank you.